Hello, this is Dr. Flight, and this video presentation will feature concepts that are associated with bringing the product to market by designing channels. It's also thought of as channel mapping when we think about the different ways that we can construct a channel so that the product goes from a manufacturer to intermediaries and then finally the end user. So that's what this discussion is about. And so channel design considerations is what it's called. Okay, as we begin to think about how we're going to bring the product to market, what we might do is draw out in a map the process from which the product will flow, oftentimes from a producer or manufacturer down to an end user or consumer. And in between those 2 points, we have intermediaries, and displayed here would be a channel map that would include some type of an agent. So this would probably be a selling agent. Sometimes we have buying agents as well, but a selling agent would be responsible for, finding buyers and then making a transaction happen between the producer and the buyer. We have wholesalers or distributors who would warehouse, they would break bulk, they would also find additional buyers of the product one step downstream. And then finally we have retailers and resellers. So those would be the intermediaries in this particular channel design or channel mapping that we would think about. So these types of maps can be done, and this one here is a fairly traditional map. So it would look very vertical, and there would be a fairly clear flow in terms of products to one single market of consumers. The typical design for a channel, though, is very rarely this linear and oftentimes has a lot more complexity associated with it. There are many times when we use a dual channel system or a multi-channel system where we look to have different routes in which the product can flow to the customer. And in particular, what we want to think about is how we define the customer and customer segment. And we note that different customer segments have different requirements for delivery and interactions and so forth. So in this example of a dual or multi-channel map, we have the producer who sells directly to customer segment 2, but then they also have an alternative mapping process or channel where they have some type of a wholesaler and then retailers, and then those outlets serve customer segment number 1. Here's another example, again, of a dual system. This is a more complicated system where there are consumer markets and there are business markets. However, in the multi or dual system, we think of them as just simply different market segments, so they're different types of customers. And as you can imagine, these different customers certainly have different needs, and so those needs are met by us bringing the product to them in different ways. So we'll have the technology producer here, and then we'll have a channel for our consumer customers, and then a channel for our business customers. Our channel for our business customers may be direct or may use some type of a business intermediary or distributor along the way. We have a B2C channel that goes to retailers and also direct. So this might be a specialty website that's geared towards consumers, or specialty retailers that would handle high technology products. But either way, we have different intermediaries performing different roles as a result and as a need that's reflected in the marketplace for the different market segments that exist. Another way to think about this is when we look at what these market segments would be willing to pay and the dynamics of the market segments, which would require a different sales approach and a different channel or distribution approach. So if we have, again, an electronics company here, that's the producer or that has the brand that they're selling, we have large accounts. So these would be customers who buy a lot of product, and they are significant, in terms of dollars, per account. They may require a direct approach from the company in order to sell to them. They want hands-on, personalized attention because the account value is so large. We may have another approach where we have medium-sized accounts. And in this case, what we are using here is a sales agent. So we're hiring an outside firm to do some of the selling for us. So there'll be outside salespeople who are being used to handle these medium-sized accounts. We may also use some type of a distributor here that may also serve some of these medium-sized accounts too. Finally, we have small buyers who do not represent very large purchasers when you consider like the large accounts and the medium accounts, but they may represent a large overall volume for the firm, and we want to be able to reach them. They might be scattered in a lot of locations, so we might use retailers to be able to handle that particular type of buyer. So we have three different distinct market segments, each of which have different needs in terms of the relationship we're going to form with them, and different information needs, different delivery needs, and so forth. And so we create a new channel or a different channel design for each one of them. So this is actually significant because every time we have intermediaries, these intermediaries will add value to the overall value proposition, but they'll also expect some type of compensation in return. So there's a concept here called a pocket price. The pocket price is the amount in which in this case, the producer will be able to sell the product to the next recipient in line, if you will. So for instance, they're selling to large accounts directly, so there are no intermediaries here. They are selling directly to the large account, and so we have $10,000 which is being sold, or of product that's being sold and being returned to the company. However, there is a transaction cost associated with making that happen. So in other words, we still have a cost to be able to come to the market and be able to do business with this large account. After we account for that cost, the net pocket price for the firm is $9,500. So in other words, $9,500 is the amount that they are netting from selling directly to a large account in this example. The pocket price for medium-sized accounts, again, the product is still coming through, but we have a sales rep. Remember, we had a sales representative help us out. They charge a commission. If they buy directly from the sales rep, then $3,000 minus $150 would be our pocket price. If they go this other route, so this other route like this, then we have to compensate the distributor, and we have to take into account other transaction costs that are associated with making this deal happen as well. So there are multiple costs that are associated with making this transaction happening, whether it goes through a sales rep or a commissioned agent, or whether it comes up through a distributor. There are going to be a transaction costs involved, and tacking those expenses on and reducing or taking away from our what the customer pays, we have a resulting pocket price that comes to the company of $2,352 on average. On average. Okay, so again, we're making less money here. So there's the key. We're making less money, but we're incurring also a different cost structure associated with making this deal happen. And also, if you consider the producer probably doesn't have the resources to try to reach all of these medium-sized accounts. So if we didn't go through this process, we probably would lose business that we otherwise are now getting because we have channel partners that are willing to go out and service these smaller accounts. The final type of buyer, the small buyer, who purchases through more of a traditional supply chain with multiple intermediaries, pays $1,000, some of which goes to the retailer for their profit, some goes to the distributor who also earns a profit or some type of margin on making the transaction. And then we have transaction costs above and beyond that. So after the $1,000 is paid, the intermediaries are paid, and we're left with $673 of our pocket price for that particular buyer. Sometimes we call this chain markup pricing or demand backwards pricing when we go from the consumer and we go and we extract a certain amount of margin at each supply chain member, and then we're left with our dollar amount, this pocket price that's available to us. That's not uncommon, and it's actually a way that we can start to think about the profitability of hitting multiple markets. Market segments, and in particular, the cost and effect of using different supply chain channel designs or maps. So yes, we make more money when we service these large accounts ourselves directly. But again, we have to do that if we're the producer, and we have to have people who are able to take care of that. To look at this a little bit more in a little bit more detail, we can consider the same type of channels. So we have the direct channel like we just had, we have the mixed channel, and then we have the indirect channel. And so again, these would be the small buyers for the indirect channel, the medium accounts, and the large accounts. Now note also the distribution of what percentage of sales are happening here. So the small buyers represent 40% of our business, as do our large buyers, and then our medium buyers here represent about 20%. So all three market segments are significant to us. We would not want to lose any of these. Some are more significant than others, but still they represent a good portion of our overall business, and so we can't really ignore them. In the middle portion here, we have the distribution of our expenses associated with our intermediaries. You'll note that in the direct version, there are none. And then in the mixed and the indirect version, there is some cost that's built in to doing the business this way and designing the channel this way. And so some of these are straight up fees. Some of these are percentages on sales. So if you have a percent markup, for instance, then a retailer very often has a percent markup over cost, and so they might, charge that. Sales agents certainly are going to be on commission a lot of the time. Again, that would be a percent markup type of a thing that they would incur. We could actually kind of ignore that because in this case, I don't believe there was one. So that doesn't even need to be there. And so basically what happens is we have what the customer would be willing to spend less the amount that the channel will cost, and that gives us a dollar amount that moves up. Then on top of that, we have something called the transaction cost, which we mentioned last slide. There is a cost associated with simply doing business, and if we're going to do the sales function ourselves, we have to have the resources internally to actually be able to complete the sale and make the transaction happen and all of that stuff. What we do is we estimate that that transaction cost for us to do it ourselves is roughly 5%. If we have others do it for us, then there's less transaction cost in this particular scenario. So it may be worth our while to have outside sales agents do our selling function because there's less transaction cost involved. So there's a possibility there. However, we're giving up, some of these margins that we otherwise would be, would be zero for us in other cases. Okay, so 3 channel designs, 3 cost structures, 3 different types of price points that the customer is willing to pay result in 3 different pocket prices that the firm, the producer, will ultimately bring home. Now, from these, we look at our other traditional costs. So we have cost of goods sold, we have our percent margin, so we can calculate our gross sales. We have MSE here. We have it in percentage and dollar terms, but our marketing sales expenses. So we can calculate our net marketing contribution and then our efficiency measures, ROS and ROI, based on that. Now, this gets pretty interesting because we have this 5% transaction costs that's going on here. And what you're going to find is that this translates into much higher costs of doing business when you compare it to other channel designs that we have developed here. So different cost structures here based on the amount of work we have to do to ultimately get the product to market. We're doing a lot of the work in the direct channel. Others in the channel chain here are doing the work for us here in the mixed and indirect channel designs. Also, notice that the marketing sales expenses are much higher. Again, we're doing a lot of this legwork ourselves instead of having others do it for us. So even though we're doing this direct approach, we are making more money per customer. When you start looking at what the firm makes, yep, the greater net marketing contribution. But when you start looking at return on sales and we look at return on investment, this may not be the best use of our resources. We may want to maybe incorporate a sales agent to handle our large accounts. That might make a better deal for us. It's something that we would want to manage, and we wanted to think about in terms of how we would want to move forward with that. So this gives us a much clearer picture of the effectiveness and the constraints and such that you would find for firms. So consider the trade-offs. This is important. Consider the trade-off between profit and what the channel members could offer us and the cost that we will have to incur relative to the benefit that is being provided. So in other words, is it worth us to absorb our internal cost to just go it alone and go direct, or does it make more sense for us to provide other channel options and ultimately have other channel members do this job? That's what we want to think about for that. Now, again, multi-channel designs can be tricky. One note of caution would be a situation where conflict can occur if we have a dual channel design or a multi-channel design. That should be an A, not an E. A dual channel design. We don't have people fighting right now, although conflict could, I guess, be considered fighting, but we have a multi-channel design. What happens when customer segments blend into each other and there's an overlap between customer segments? So in other words, you have traditional customers in this sense buying from retailers who are here. What if some of them start buying online and they start to buy from here. What happens is the retailers start to get upset. They get disappointed. Their sales start to go down, and they feel that the producer who's now selling directly is violating their trust and the relationship that they would otherwise have. So there are cautions here that we would want to be concerned about, specifically when we have customer segments that are not very well defined or that could switch back and forth between different channel designs. That could certainly cause some conflict within the channel that we're creating. Finally, another type of channel design or mapping is something called a hybrid channel. And this is a case where we have customers that are interacting directly with multiple channel members or intermediaries. So it may be the case that we want to gain the efficiency of volume from a retailer, but that retailer may not do customer service particularly well. So I want the retailer to sell the product, but if the customer has a problem with the product, I don't want them going to the retailer. I want them calling service and support, which is done by somebody else. So we have direct control maybe over service and support. And if the customer has a problem, they call us directly and we can handle their issues. We don't want them going through the retailer, because the retailer, if they're volume focused and cost oriented, then they're not going to be necessarily great at service. Returns as well. Again, do we want the customer to send the product back to the retailer, who sends it to the distributor, who then brings it to us? Or do we want the returns to come directly to us, and then we can service the product, we can help the customer, we can treat them with good care so that they continue to be our customer. This is a hybrid channel design. And so basically the idea is we're splitting up responsibilities in the supply chain, and these are all touch points. These are all touch points that the customer will have. And what we want to do is we want to have much greater control over these aspects that the customer is going to experience. All right, so moving on, another area that we want to talk about when we talk about channels are VMSs. So VMSs are vertical marketing systems. And if we look at relationships and relationship strengths, vertical markets or vertically integrated companies are ones that have a strong ownership position in another company that is in their supply chain or their channel of distribution. So when we talk about VMSs, what we're talking about is a very, very strong relationship that's highly coordinated among channel members. So coordination of channel activities are absolutely controlled. We often focus on a channel leader to do this role. This might be the company that owns the other companies in the channel, or they could be an administrator, an administrative firm that, again, dictates the rules of the supply chain to the other members. So channel leaders then establish these rules. We have different types of VMSs, including corporate and ownership VMSs, contractually focused VMSs, administered, and then administered and relationship VMSs are very similar to each other. Corporate ownership and ownership stakes that companies have within each other is strictly where one firm takes an ownership position in another. So we could, if I'm a producer, I may want to buy a trucking company or a distributor, and then by doing so, I control directly that part of the supply chain because I own them as a subsidiary. And so we have a relationship where they do our shipping and our distributing and such. That would be forward integration. That's when we move towards the customer with an ownership position. Backward integration is when you start to acquire the parts of your supply chain that are further away from your customer. So if you're a manufacturer, you may start to take ownership positions in your suppliers or with your suppliers. So that's an ownership corporate, type of a deal. Obviously, we're going to have a high degree of shared information. We're going to work towards reducing conflict, in improving and establishing control. We know that this is especially important where there's a lot of buyer-seller power that is in conflict with each other. So if a firm absolutely needs a retailer, then to be able to do its job, and they feel like the retailer has too much power, they may try to buy them to avoid some of those power discrepancies within the supply chain. For sure, that might happen. Other forms of VMSs that are not ownership focused, one is a contractual form of VMS. So basically what happens is one company forms a long-term contract with another to be exclusive partners. So this might be thought of as like a strategic alliance, but the contract binds them. Oftentimes we think about franchises as the example of this type of VMS, where you have a parent and then you have franchisees who go out and they're the ones who have the contract with the parent company to be their brand out there. Long-term stability is a big issue here. Again, control over the marketplace, control over the brand. Those are all things that you want to be able to focus on. The last two deal with administered and then relationship-focused VMSs. In an administered VMS, one channel member informally outlines the types of activities that everybody will do. It's absolutely leveraged on buyer and seller power. So we have one supply chain member who's a power force and requires the other supply chain members to basically do what they say because they have a huge amount of buying power that they have, or they sell a lot of products. So Walmart is an administered VMS channel captain. It might not be a formal relationship that they have where they formally have a long-term contract and they control the deal. But if you want to do business with them, then you have to do what they say. I mean, basically, that's the informal notion going on there. Relationship VMSs are much more relationship focused. So it might be that two firms want to do business with each other, but there's more mutual respect between the two, and so they choose to do business together because it's in their best interest to do so. So there's mutual power, mutual benefits that are received. Okay, so that's a bit about vertical marketing systems because it relates really to channel design and relationships as we think about firms together. The last area that we'll focus on deals with just touching slightly on services. So a lot of people think that services get left out, and they do. The reality is when we talk about distribution, we almost exclusively think about tangible goods, but services can be distributed as well. So we certainly have a production of a service and a delivery of a service. So that might happen in a very short sense, like the person who the creator of the service is also the deliverer of the service directly to the end user. That's all of the supply chain functions being done potentially by one channel member. So it's a very short channel, but it is a channel. There may be distributors. There are certainly franchises involved in service environments. So there, for instance, are chains of hair salons. A hair salon chain would be in a franchise environment, and they would distribute product. And also, if you think about it, there might be a special type of haircut design that is unique to a particular chain of salons. That design would be distributed as well. or that specialty cut or whatnot would be done too. So recall, distributing is the idea of getting a product to a place at a time the customer wants. So think about placing services. Where would services be placed? So could we, for instance, place a hospital or a clinic in a location that is away from the hospital itself, but maybe a satellite location that's closer to the customer? Sure, of course we could do that. Could we have little kiosks or little food stands or things of that nature from a traditional restaurant? Instead of going to the restaurant, you go to their kiosk, which is conveniently located where you are. Sure, of course we can do that. We also have remote ticket locations where you can buy tickets to different events and so forth. So we can certainly have points of contact that are distributed for service events where transactions can take place and where services can be rendered. So distribution of services certainly happens and a lot of times carries many of the same features of physical distribution as well. There is a short note here. A lot of times when we talk about services in a product context, we do note that there are, of course, significant differences that separate or distinguish a service from a tangible good. And one is the fact that you typically cannot hold a service. So that's a challenge when you come to distribute. You're not distributing something you hold, you're distributing something that is done. So that's something to consider. And some of the gray area on these items actually happens in the digital world. Like, so for instance, if you buy a music download, well, what is that? Is that a service? It's not a tangible good. It's not a product in the sense that you can hold it. You can't really see it. You can hear the effects of it if you play it, but it's kind of in the middle here, which shares some of these aspects of services. Another feature of a service is that there is what they call inseparability between what the provider gives you and the product that is being produced. So like an artist, the product is the artist. It is the art of the artist. The art or the product is inseparable from that person who is providing the service. Then finally, perishability and variability. These are two other aspects of services that are unique. Perishability is this idea that a service gets used up and has to be replaced. It does not stand the test of time. They never do. So they're always perishable, and measuring variability is always a challenge. So quality control for services is sometimes a challenge because different service providers provide different levels of service, and so there's often a huge inconsistency in the service level or the quality, service quality levels that are being provided, and so managing that process is difficult to do. So that's just a note on services as we start to think about how we can distribute them. And again, this discussion really is focused on how we think about designing a supply chain and or a channel of distribution, and how those channels reflect the needs of market segments. And as a result, different channel design has a different impact on the profitability of each market segment and what we are able to retain in our pocket as money that we receive from the channel process. So, all right, that is it. And this has been Channel Design Considerations.